keynote speech will be given by Mr. Tony Raven, former CEO of Cambridge Enterprise and founder of Cambridge Enterprise. Tony-san, Mr. Raven, this is the page to introduce him. He is a researcher cited in many papers and books, and also he has been successful as a serial entrepreneur as well. He is an international leader for commercialization of university researches. Cambridge Enterprise, he has led this firm for about 10 years and have been commercializing various and many researches conducted by the university. Currently, he has been advising to the UK government on technical migration, etc. Today, based on his vast experience as an overseas mentor and investor, he will be talking about building an innovation ecosystem. So now over to you, Tony-san.
Yes, and thank you very much for your kind invitation to join you today and share some of my experiences and observations of building an innovation ecosystem. I've spent many years trying to understand and develop innovation ecosystems across the world, but I'm going to concentrate today mainly on what happened at Cambridge, but the lessons I think are common to many other successful ecosystems. Next slide, please. So I come at this from a number of different angles. I've been a researcher, including a very wonderful time I spent at Handai in Osaka University as a researcher. I've been a serial entrepreneur with 3 successful companies. I've worked in tech transfer at a small university and most recently 10 years at the University of Cambridge. And I was the creator of something called 10U, which is the technology transfer offices of 10 of the world's leading universities, including Stanford and MIT, Oxford and Cambridge. And then as part of that role, I've set up a number of investment funds around university spin-outs. Next slide, please. So a quick timeline of the Cambridge cluster development, because these things don't happen overnight. And in the early days, I think there was no particular plan to Cambridge, and the way it developed, it just happened. More recently, there's been much more attempt to put a structure onto this. But it really started, people think, in 1960, when a company called Cambridge Consultants was set up to put the brains of Cambridge University at the disposal of the problems of British industry. So it's to use the university ideas to help British industry. But Cambridge itself was not very receptive to industry. In 1967, IBM wanted to set up their European headquarters, research headquarters in Cambridge, and the city turned them away and said, we don't want industry in the city. But that led to a report by Neville Mott, a Nobel Prize winning physicist, that ended the opposition to industrial development in Cambridge in 1969. And immediately following that, Europe's first science park was set up by Trinity College, one of the colleges of Cambridge University. At that time, the intellectual property from research was owned by the government, but in 1987, that was transferred to the university ownership. Now, alongside that, one of our most successful companies, ARM, the chip designer behind most of mobile computing, was set up in 1990. And I'll say more about that later. In 2005, Cambridge Enterprise was set up by the university, although there had been organizations with different names that came before that. And then in 2012, we set up Cambridge Innovation Capital to actually back financially the companies which were coming out of the university. Next slide, please. And it didn't happen overnight in terms of technologies either. In the early days, Cambridge's strength was in radio, in scientific instruments, and aerospace. And then in each decade following, new technology areas were added. So first of all, computer-aided design, and then inkjet printing, technology consulting and software. And you can see in red each decade the new technologies which were added. And most recently, the technologies have been things like artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, batteries, electric vehicles, speech. Many new ones added since 2010. Okay, next slide, please. One of the things we've done in Cambridge is to map all of the technology companies in Cambridge, and you will see there are about 5,000 companies there. They're turning over just under 20 billion pounds, so about $20 billion of revenue, and employing 71,000 people. And the size of the region, the population is about 600,000. So more than 10% of the population work in technology industries. Next slide, please. And most recently, Cambridge has had over 23 unicorn companies. And most recently, we've had 4 new ones join that group. And if we include the investment fund, Cambridge Innovation Capital, that's 5 new unicorns. So for a small city of 130,000 people, 600,000 people in the region, this is quite a powerful engine. Next slide, please. One of the things which has happened over the last 10 years is then all those 5,000 innovative, often deep tech companies have attracted in major players to be part of the community. And I've seen similar things happen in places like San Diego and Austin, Texas, which is that large number of small, exciting companies attracts the big companies who want to partner with them and want to acquire them. So we have Amazon in Cambridge because the Amazon Alexa was first developed in Cambridge. Qualcomm moved in to acquire a company in broadband and Bluetooth chips for mobile computing. AstraZeneca moved its headquarters to Cambridge. Apple acquired a company in the Siri space to add to its technology. Microsoft, Huawei, brother from Japan, moved in because of the inkjet printing capabilities. So that's the latest phase of the development. Next slide, please. But one of the important things about Cambridge is the importance of people, and this, I think, is true of many ecosystems. Next slide. I'm sorry that this slide is very messy. I borrowed it from somebody else and I didn't have time to clean it up. But what you see here is rings. So this is 1950s, 1960s, going through to 1992,000. And these are the companies and the people who were backing them. And you will see that there are some common people going throughout all of those decades. So Herman Hauser, Andy Hopper, and David Cleaveley are ones that I have highlighted. And but there are many others who have been working through that period. First of all, starting their own companies, becoming successful entrepreneurs, and then supporting as mentors the new companies which are starting up across Cambridge. So where did they come from? Well, Herman Hauser, he was a founder of ARM Computing. He came to the university, he joined the university from Austria to do his doctoral degree, his PhD. His co-founder of ARM was Andy Hopper, who came to the university from Poland to do his PhD. And when they finished their PhD, they liked Cambridge, they wanted to stay, so they tried to find things to do, and the thing they found to do became ARM. And then we have David Cleveley. He came to Cambridge to do his PhD from another part of the UK. So these people come into the university and stay and move on. And there's an interesting statistic I found in the United States that 50% of the billion-dollar companies in the United States have a founder who is an immigrant. And half of those immigrant founders came to the United States first as university students. So they came to the universities, and then after graduating, they started their companies, which went on to become $1 billion. And they are a big engine in driving that activity. Next slide, please. And I think we have in Cambridge now a lot of mentors and coaches who help our new companies starting up and growing and create the ecosystem. Many of them are angel investors, so they're investing themselves to start these companies, and most of them have been successful entrepreneurs. But why have I put this slide up? And it's because there is a difference between a mentor and a chief executive. And this is quite important, and we do training about how to be a mentor. The chief executive is the one kicking the ball. He's the head of the team. He's responsible for the players on the field and what they are doing. The coach is the one that helps them be as good as possible. But in this case, in the coach of the Japanese national team, he was a very successful player. He knows what it is to be a chief executive, but he doesn't run on the field and start kicking the ball. He stands there and he gives advice and guidance from the side. And we find many mentors and coaches, when they first join, they are with a CEO who's not experienced. And rather than helping the CEO develop his thinking of how to run the company, they take over. They want to become the CEO and they say, it's easier. I know how to do this. I'll do it. That's the wrong way for a coach. It's important to have people who are there, like the coach in the football team, who is helping the players, who is helping the founders. He is not taking over from them. Next slide, please. The other thing which is important, I think, for successful ecosystems is investment capital, money for the companies, the startups in the ecosystem. Next slide, please. When I arrived at Cambridge, two things I said is the mission of Cambridge Enterprise is to have an ambition which is worthy of a university like Cambridge. So Cambridge is a very ambitious university. It's a world-leading university, and we have to have the same ambition to do justice to the opportunities that our academics create. And to do that, we needed access to significant funding. That was in 2012. Next slide, please. And this is how it's developed. So when I arrived in 1995, a seed fund had been set up by the university with £2.5 million. In 2009, on the 800th anniversary of the university, they tried to raise a philanthropic fund from donors, and the target was 5 million. They managed to raise 1 million from donors, so that was not very successful. And that has been combined now with the seed fund. But we set up a fund which was for the alumni of the university and friends of the university, which was based around a tax break and investment. It wasn't a gift like the Discovery Fund, it was an investment. And that fund is raising about £3 million a year from our alumni and supporters of the university. And then to allow our companies to grow with ambition, we set up Cambridge Innovation Capital with initially £50 million from 3 city investors in London. Where are they today? These two are now the seed funds, and they have more than £100 million of assets under management in 2021. And CIC has now raised £500 million and has more than £1 billion of assets under management. So you can see these funds have been successful as funds when they have ambition. Next slide, please. And you can see that in the figures. In 2011, our average investment was £50,000. In 2021, it's £250,000, so 5 times bigger. And you can see the number of investments approved has gone up from £500,000 a year now to £8 million a year with the two funds, the University Fund and the Alumni Fund. And the assets under management have grown as well to over 100 million now today. So that's the impact that the fund has in Cambridge, but it's not just Cambridge. Let me show you Oxford. Next slide, please. This is Oxford since 1959. So for many years until 1998, they left it to the market, to external investors and entrepreneurs to develop companies. You see a small number of companies. Oxford Instruments is the famous and big one. Then they set up an office to support the spin-out companies from the university, and you saw the number of companies every year increase. But then they set up an investment fund called Oxford Science Enterprises, and that is also a $1 billion fund. And you can see the effect that having access to significant investment in Oxford has made to the volume of companies flowing into the ecosystem and growing the ecosystem. That's Oxford. Next slide, please. And this is not just big universities. This is in South Africa. This is Stellenbosch University. And this is their historical number of spin-out companies with a government fund available. But the fund took 2 years to take decisions. And then when they set up the South African University Technology Fund, you see again, the number of companies starting to come out and grow increases very rapidly. So access to investment is very important. Next slide, please. I'd also say, because in Todai, in Tokyo University, you have one of the world's leading universities, and universities are, in my observation, important to all the successful clusters. If you think Silicon Valley with Stanford, Kendall Square with MIT and Harvard, Austin, Texas with the University of Texas in Austin, the Research Triangle in Carolina with 3 universities there. They all have universities at their center, the same with Cambridge and Oxford. But why are they important? Well, this is some data that I've received recently. 50% of the venture dollars, US venture capital dollars in life sciences go to university spinouts, and 20% in physical and engineering science go to university spinouts, which means that spinouts are a large part of the venture capital activity in the country, a large part of the growing technology companies going into these clusters. In the UK, 67% of the top 30 biotech and pharma companies are spin-outs from universities, and 35% of the high growth life science companies are also university spin-outs. And another piece very recent, 34% of incubators in the UK are supported by university funding, not commercial funding. So they are very important actors and players in this whole innovation ecosystem development. Next slide, please. But we often look at places like Stanford, Boston, Cambridge, and other places and say, we all need incubators, we need everything they have. We need a Y Combinator, we need science parks. But they didn't start that way. In Silicon Valley, it started in domestic garages. So these are the places, if you click to bring up the animation, please. This is where Disney started. Next one is where Hewlett-Packard started. Next one, where Apple started. And the last one is where Google started. They didn't need incubators. They're nice to have, but they're not required. In Cambridge, the companies started in domestic houses. They started in bedrooms in domestic housing. And only later did the science parks and incubators come along. So they're nice to have, but they're not essential. What's important is to have some space and the money to support them. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll finish. I think my time is up, and say thank you for having me today. It's been very enjoyable to join you in this seminar, and hope that the innovation ecosystem in Tokyo, which is already very active and strong in international measures, continues to grow with great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony-san. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Oh, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kelly Langley. I'm with Langley Esquire. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to ask a little bit about policies, and if you have any experience or if you've noticed any policies in particular in Cambridge that have really been kind of those that unlock the potential. Tokyo and Japan's national government is putting a lot of effort into redrafting kind of startup policies and identifying where are the lowest hanging fruit and the key barriers to fostering a startup innovation ecosystem. Do you have any thoughts or input on this front in terms of what the government can do to play a key role other than simply funding that may be a unlocker of this potential? Thank you.
Yes, and I think it is to act as a sort of a supporter and convener also. I think most of the ecosystems that we look at in the world, Cambridge, Stanford, MIT, in many ways they happened by accident. There was no big design plan, but there are certain features of them which are common. And research out of Michael Cohen at the University of Berkeley, California, has written on these, and they include things like they are very bottom up, they are very devolved, they do not sort of have some big central plan. They encourage people to be active, and Cambridge is very much an extreme on that. Individuals have great freedom to do whatever they want. The university doesn't try to control them, and it allows things to just grow organically and allow. Cambridge is the University of Darwin. It allows Darwinism to act on these ideas. So if the ideas work, they will grow and they will be successful. And if they don't work, they will die and disappear. Interestingly, recently, I've been working with the people in New York, and I think this is one of the few ecosystems which has been built by design, and that involved the universities in New York and the New York Development Authority. And it was there very much, they provided small amounts of money not to do anything specific, but just to bring people together to start talking, not trying to control it, not trying to tell them what to do, but just getting conversations started. It would provide money for dinners, it would provide money for events to bring the founders of the startups together. And Mayor Bloomberg, the mayor of New York at the time, would come to these events and spend the evening with the founders of these young companies to show that New York thought it was important. So there's lots of things I think you can do, and there's lots of experience around the world. It's difficult to cover it all in the answer to one question, but that's something I'd be very happy to talk about offline if you want to explore it further.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so next.
I have another question. You mentioned something about the mentoring ecosystem of former founders, basically passing on the torch and sort of giving them advice of sharing experience. Is there also like a bigger mentor ecosystem that is not basically born from Cambridge, but maybe from surrounding areas or maybe worldwide? Can you sort of talk about the sort of setup or the mix-up of the mentor ecosystem in Cambridge?
Yes, well, there's the ecosystem in Cambridge, and that works well. Over the last 3 years, it's been different, but it has mainly worked by people coming together at events. And they can be all sorts of events. They can be music concerts, they can be book launches, they can be business events. It's a small city, people come together and they bump into each other while they go shopping. And a lot of the interaction happens that way, mentoring, or the connection of mentors to founders. But I think also, we also do use mentors who don't live in Cambridge. And one of the big advantages recently is the emergence of Zoom as a communication tool, like tonight. So I'm actually sat in the Caribbean talking to you in Tokyo about this, and the ability to do online mentoring has become much bigger. I work with a number of places, and they say we don't have any successful entrepreneurs in our town, in our city, in our country. But the thing I say to them is, if that's the case, then you almost certainly have successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, in Boston, in other places. Reconnect with those alumni around the world, the Japanese entrepreneurs around the world in successful ecosystems, and get them to mentor by a distance. And although we now use Zoom, my best mentor actually lived in Finland, and we did most of my mentoring was done in phone calls before we had all of the modern technology. So it is possible to do it remotely, and if you have good mentors who are around the world that you can identify and engage, they all seem to want to help their country of origin, and are very willing to give their time and help to help support the companies and select which are the good ones to invest in, etc. So yes, local mentors are best for physical interaction, but if you don't have them, use global mentors.